9:50 the time now. So you might know that during yesterday's breakfast we had an interruption. There was a fire alarm. People had to leave the building, which meant we couldn't speak to the Lightning Seeds frontman Broudie live on the programme.
We did record a conversation with him afterwards and spoke about all sorts of things, from his first ever gig, which was some band called the Beatles, to how Prince helped him name the Lightning Seeds. He's put all his memories and more in a new memoir.
It was intended originally just to be a book of anecdotes. So I didn't really set out to write my memoirs. I just wanted it to be anecdotal, because I found myself, be chatting to people and I'd think, well, the world's changed so much since I started playing gigs. It would be good to kind of maybe put it down on paper. And then through the stories, I think it became a little bit more personal. And then when I went to read the audiobook, that was the moment when I thought, gosh, there's a lot of stuff in here I wouldn't mind taking out.
There's a lot of grief that you've been through, that you've put in, and like how that's reflected in your music and also your attitude now, particularly to the Lightning Seeds and how that defined you. Yeah,
well, the Lightning Seeds, I was a producer and I never really wanted to be a producer, and I kind of got sidetracked because some friends of mine had a band called Echo and the Bunnymen, and I was so in awe of them and loved them so much that when they asked me to produce them, it was like fantastic, to produce them. But then I was a producer, and to actually shift track was quite difficult in a way. So I had a couple of songs that I'd written. One of those was Pure, but I felt like when I recorded it, there were too many words, and because I hadn't really written songs on my own before. And I felt like, well, there's too many, I've done this wrong, I'll scrap that one. So I never finished it, but it kind of went down as it was onto the tape. And then when I sent it to her, I didn't really know what to do. I thought, well, I've got no band, got no record contract. I've got 2 songs and a half-finished song, And I sent it to this guy who I'd met, who was a publisher. He was a bit of a sort of 60s rogue with a big cigar. And he phoned me up and he said, I love this song, let's put it out, Pure. And I was like, no, that one's not finished, And he went, it's just right. And I was like, no, I've got to, I'd change it quite a lot. And he was like, no, it's just right. And I said, well, we'll have to get a record contract. And he said, we'll just have 100 pressed up, we'll put them in rough trade, and we'll see if someone will take them to the radio. So it was a very inauspicious start, really. I had an unfinished song, no record contract, and no band. And yet that song was like this miracle that changed my life.
Do you still like the song?
It's my favourite song. I've never managed to... I think the power of the unfinished song and the unheard work, there's something... When you finish a song, it becomes something, but it stops being all these other possibilities. And I think there's a kind of a power in that. And I feel like I don't think I've ever managed to write a song that I like.
Made me smile, including you presenting Top of the Pops, because I got the sense that that is something you weren't terribly comfortable with. What was that like?
Yeah, no, it was interesting. It was odd to be asked. Actually, I wasn't expecting to be asked, and the pressure was on to a degree because I think they tried to film it as live as possible, but that concept went slightly out the window when I was doing it, just because I remember the Spice Girls were doing quite a complicated dance routine, and all I had to do was, in front of them, introduce them.
Must be easy to smile when you're #1 everywhere like the Spice Girls. They're definitely top of the pops.
And they kept getting this dance routine perfect, and I kept saying it wrong, They kept having to start again. They weren't happy with that.
Did they show their displeasure?
They certainly did. They gave me a bit of a, get on with it, get it right, because it was quite physically demanding for them.
I mean, of all your experiences, there's one that tickled me, actually. It was one that you probably don't remember as much. You're probably one of the only people in the world who didn't enjoy seeing the Beatles live.
Yeah, it's such a fantastic thing when someone says, well, what was your first gig? And you can say, the Beatles, But, the image that you have in your head wasn't my experience. I was very young, 5 or 6. My dad had somehow managed to get 3 tickets to the Beatles concert, and my 2 elder brothers could only have the tickets if they'd take me, and they weren't really happy about taking me along. But, you know, it was unconditional. You know, that was the condition that that they could have the tickets. So they took me along, and I even at that age, you know, I sort of do remember, you know, listening to the Beatles albums and stuff that my brothers had and all that, and loved it, you know. And it was very exciting, and we got into the venue, and then the lights went down, and every girl in the room screamed at the top of her voice, you know. It was overwhelming for me at that time. So I burst into tears, you know. And my brother was really cheesed off, and he thought, well, I'm not going to leave. So he said, right, face the other way and put your fingers in your ears, and it'll be all right. So I turned the other way and I put my fingers in my ears till it was all over. So that was my experience of seeing the Beatles.
Do you think that a little bit of you, despite them not listening or looking, was inspired in that moment in time? Do you think there was a little bit of the young Ian Broudie who was thinking, do you know what?
Yeah, I'd love to say that. I think the Beatles are an inspiration to me, but I don't know if that particular experience enhanced the inspiration.
There was another connection. I'm fascinated by the Prince connection, which is another curious one, isn't it, in the things that you've been involved in?
Well, it was just, you know, I did never work with Prince or anything. I liked that song, Raspberry Beret, and I was trying to think of a name for my group, which is actually a tricky thing. It's quite hard to figure a name for your group, something you're going to be comfortable with. It's always tricky. And I was listening to that song, and I thought he said, hanging out with the lightning seeds. And it turns out that he says the thunder hides what the lightning sees. But I thought, hanging out with the lightning seeds, they sound like they are a cool bunch of people, you know, wish I was hanging out with the lightning seeds. So then when I realised that that wasn't what he was saying, I thought, well, you know, we can be that bunch of people, you know, and I took the name.
You didn't get to meet or anything? That never happened?
I didn't get to meet Prince, but I was having my hair cut actually by one of my mates, and I sort of arrived a little bit early, and he said, just let me finish this, come back in 10 minutes, you know. And when I went back, he was cutting my hair, and he said, oh, you know, the guy who was here before, he manages Prince, you know. And he said to me, who's the Scouser who just came in, you know? And I said, oh, it's Ian from the Lightning Seeds. And he said, oh, Prince loves that story. So that was, you know, validation for me.
So you were known regardless. Yeah. Ian, it's been a joy talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us on the sofa.
He's a very softly spoken, brilliant raconteur, isn't he?
Lovely man. Really enjoyed it. Enjoyed talking to him. His book, Tomorrow's Here Today, is out now. The Lightning Seeds' new album and Greatest Hits tour will follow next year.